When Joe's father got out of the Air Force, he wanted to come back to Western North Carolina to live because he was raised here. He got a job as a pilot with Pan American Airlines, and when he was out on his trips, that's when I would go downtown with the children and do my shopping. And all the major department stores were downtown at that time, and we had no mall, so anything you wanted could be found downtown. The only problem was taking the children. That was an experience.
My first memories growing up in Asheville were the shopping trips downtown with my mother and my older sister and brother. My brother and I usually were less enthused about these shopping trips, but now as a parent myself, I don't even imagine going shopping with 3 kids. Bon Marche's located on Haywood Street was typically where we'd start shopping. The space is now an Italian furniture store called Mobilia. If we were lucky, our next stop would be Woolworth's for a Coke float at the soda fountain. The soda fountain looks pretty much the way it did back in the early 70s, and that's about the only thing that hasn't changed in Woolworth's. After the Coke float, we'd go across the street to Ivy's. One thing that sticks in my memory is the door handles on the big glass doors. 2 of those handles are still there, but it's now a restaurant called the Flying Frog. Just down the road from the Flying Frog is where the old J.C. Penney's building used to be. It was torn down to make room for 7 floors of condos. Sometimes after J.C. Penney's, we'd head down to the S&W cafeteria for lunch. Back then I thought it was just an old building and I didn't really admire the awesome stonework. And if you look outside, it really hasn't changed much throughout the years. It's the same beautiful building it always was. A couple doors down from the S&W cafeteria is where the old Belks building used to be. Now it's a parking lot for the Asheville Savings Bank. By this time it was starting to get late and our last stop was usually Sears on Cox Avenue. I'm sure by now my mother was just as ready for the shopping trip to end as my brother and I were. As for the Sears building, outside looks almost identical to the way it looked back then, except for the big Sears sign is now missing.
What I remember about Asheville back when I was a young teen is going downtown and watching movies at the Imperial Theater and the Plaza Theater, and also going to McCormick Field and watching the ball games back when the stadium was a lot older and a little bit more run down, but those were good memories. A lot better than going downtown shopping, that's for sure.
Yes, shopping downtown was painful, but going to see all the big Disney movies like Herbie the Love Bug at the Plaza Theater was definitely more enjoyable. I remember after the movie, a Herbie replica came driving up on the sidewalk and was acting like the real Herbie in the movie. At the time I thought it was pretty cool. The Plaza Theater is now the Pac Plaza Arts and Education Center. If we weren't going to see a movie, we were going to see Asheville's baseball team play at McCormick Field. My first recollections of them were as the Asheville Orioles, but before that they were the Asheville Tourist. They changed their name back to Asheville Tourist around the mid-70s, and McCormick Field has since been renovated as a much nicer ballpark than when we used to go to it. Usually, on the way to see a ball game at McCormick, we'd drive past the infamous Eagle Street. Rumor back then was that if you were white, you just didn't go down Eagle Street. Of course, me being a nosy little boy, I would always look as far down Eagle Street to see what was going on, only to see a bunch of people hanging out. Today, Eagle Street has some of the same stores it had back then, with the addition of some restaurants and galleries. Just down from Eagle Street is the Fine Arts Theater, where more select movies such as foreign and independent films are shown that most mainstream theaters do not. Back in the early 70s, those select movies were what we called skin flicks, and they probably had a different target audience from the movies they show today. Around that same time frame, the initial decline of downtown started with the construction of the Asheville Mall. All the big name department stores such as Sears, Belks, Ivy's, and even the S&W cafeteria moved into the mall when it opened up. After much heated debate, it was decided to build the Civic Center downtown to prevent the decline of the downtown area. The Civic Center did draw some big names such as Elvis in 1975, and he was supposed to play again in 1977, but unfortunately the King died before that date. In spite of the Civic Center being built, downtown continued its downward spiral. At the same time the Civic Center was being built, the Bowcatcher Cut was also being cleared for I-240 in order to improve traffic flow from the severely congested tunnel. I remember being so irritated when traffic was backed up as far as the Westgate Bridge. Ironically, the stone from the cut was also used to build the Civic Center. The cut just flowed the traffic from downtown to the mall instead. During the late 70s and early 80s, we really spent most of our time around the mall and going to theaters that were at the mall or close to it. Around the mid-80s, I did go hang out downtown with a friend of mine who did a reggae show at the then public radio station WCQS. One thing I remember is he lived in an apartment upstairs that was really huge. His bedroom was big enough to play almost full court basketball, and sometimes we did, if he wasn't riding his mountain bike up there. Unfortunately for me, instead of buying up some of that cheap real estate downtown, I decided in November of 1986 to join the Navy and see the world. I did get to see the world and ended up doing 20 years before retiring out of the Navy. In that 20 years I had changed quite a bit, but after returning home to Asheville I realized that I hadn't changed as much as Asheville had. Asheville had become a gay-friendly town with multiple gay bars. Don't get me wrong, I'm not homophobic. I just never would have guessed Asheville, the land of the sky, getting voted a gay-friendly town. I guess really it's Asheville's beauty that has attracted not only gay people, but also cultures from across the United States and even the world. I've been all over the world and I can tell you, Asheville has become quite the melting pot. And since returning home, I've really come to appreciate many of those old buildings that I never really paid attention to, that are now renovated and quite beautiful. Asheville has become quite the mecca of fine dining and art of many types. It's even got an assortment of street entertainers, some that make you scratch your head, but for the most part are quite entertaining. It's really scary to think that once the idea was to level downtown and build the mall there. Now that would have been a tragedy. And let's say I'm rather proud of Asheville, and after being away for 20 years, I'm happy to call her home.